the nexus of starting to understand where the crisis is, water, landscape, things coming out, and then I guess what Allard said was that in a landscape perspective vis-a-vis urbanization and these million people cities conceptually coming up every year. Maybe that's one way to move this forward. It's a thought. Yes?
That's a very quick comment on what you said, because unfortunately
within the civil society, yes, I'm from Egypt. I'm the chair of the civil society discourse, which is based in Entebbe, by the way. The office is secretariat. But the vision of the civil society that water is not a commodity. Water is a shared resource, and the basin is also a basin. It is not that the water is coming from Kenya to Egypt. It's a basin that has all the people have the rights to use the shared common resource. And here is the difference between the diplomacy that was initiated by politicians, where they were discussing how much you have to pay me for the water coming from my country to your country, where the civil society were talking about one mind, one family. This is the slogan. We are living as one family. We are living in the same building. This building has, a downstream and has an upstream, but at the same time, we are living in the same basin, and we have to deal with all the citizens as equal in getting the resource and also in getting all the different aspects of food security, energy security, and other sources of security. Thank you very much.
Yeah, the word commodity is a loaded word. I probably should have said resource. Water is a resource. It's an element that you can measure, and you can measure it as units vis-a-vis a landscape, which is an area where resources come from, which may or may not be an economic commodity depending on how it's managed. Yes, Derek, and then.
Thanks. Derek Quayle from Shell, also seconded into IUCN, double hacking. But I do find this whole topic fantastically interesting, but I've also found a comment yesterday probably even more interesting, and we listened to Peter Gardner in the Forest Dialogue, where they talked of was it 4 Fs or 5 Fs? It was food, fuel, fiber, and something else. I don't remember them offhand. And it's great to see these things going on in parallel. Two elements of this: how do we link up these parallel initiatives? And the second part of it, probably the most important part of it, is we're not hearing about governments being involved in this. And are they not an essential part of the whole process?
Anybody want to respond to that, or Nigel says it?
No, my point was linked to the value.
So governments have to be linked with all this. Obviously, I mean, it's going to be governments, NGOs, civil society as a whole, industry, academia, all playing a role. All of us have something to contribute to this situation. And of course, those of us who've been involved in this for decades have seen the ebb and flow of a variety of those sectors in terms of their engagement, in terms of their ability to act, and all have to be able to come together. That's what we have to catalyze to make progress on these issues.
Okay, Nigel?
This is a personal story, in fact, in terms of the value of water. My grandfather was a water engineer in India and then in Kenya. And when I was about 6, he put me on his knee and he said, "My son," as he held up a glass of water, "this is more precious than gold and diamonds. I call it God's ale." And at 6 I said, yeah, surely you must be right. Isn't it interesting how all my life in the world environment it's become more and more important? And in the last 3 years it's become even more important in terms of the discussions. So I find that really interesting. And then the other day I nearly got shot. This is when I had a great friend come and stay from Australia, and he noticed in my bathroom one of my taps was dripping. He said, "You just cannot do that, to allow that tap to drip. In Australia, you'd be shot." So I view water from 2 personal experiences in a different light, and I do, on a serious note, do believe that if the consumer society saw every glass of water as something that precious, but also then related it to the bigger picture. So at a local level, at a national level, at a continental level, and an international level, and if within that the complexity of what we're discussing today And that's why I still believe that Shell and other companies have a responsibility to share their knowledge on this to the punters that they liaise with. Then I think we're going to win, because that the power of the consumer is still very, very important.
Very, very interesting. Paul?
Several important issues coming up now. Ethiopia is my second home country, so I just want to emphasize that most of the water for the island comes from Ethiopia. So Egypt is owing a lot of money to Ethiopia. No, but it actually is a very, very important issue you're raising about diplomacy. I think that the view of resource scarcity, which is the headline, and potential conflict has been going up and down in a remarkably short time. Only a few years ago we were quite sure that there would be many more resource-based conflicts, right? And that states and people and classes would go to war over scarce resources. Then we found out that around the Nile or the Mekong River and a number of other cases, you see new forms of cooperation emerging because of resource scarcity. I don't know where we stand and whether the next step is that we will see definitely some conflicts, but we will also see new forms of collaboration. IUCN is trying to assist with our transboundary dialogues to make sure that you actually get this new form of collaboration when many of the natural resources, of course, cross national boundaries. But I do think that as for our political scientists, we really need their assistance in telling us where is it going, where is it heading? Is it more in the conflict direction, or is it more in the new form of collaboration direction that things are moving? So I think that's important. Secondly, on governance, yes, governments have to be involved, but what we're trying to look at with one of our flagship knowledge products, natural resource governance, is to say that governance of natural resource, of the use of natural resources, actually happens at a lot of levels. It happens at community levels, it happens by governments, it happens wherever. So we have to find a new way of looking at governance in order to understand the best way of governing the use of natural resources. But there are specific roles that governments have to play. For example, when it comes to setting standards, although even when it comes to standards, I think in the US, California is setting a lot of standards, but it's the public authorities in California setting a lot of standards that actually are very progressive. So we do need that kind of governance, but we also need the governance where communities get together or other types of governance and natural resource. So Derek's question on how do we get all these initiatives to go together, I think, well, I have no answer to that one, because we also have to be a little bit careful about too many fashionable nexuses and concepts and stuff. So we are very happy with the nature-based solution, but we also fully recognize, don't overestimate what we can get out of that one, right? It can make a contribution, but it cannot solve climate change or food security or anything else, but it can address some specific. So start from the bottom and go up. So I'm not, yeah, that's the only thing I want to say about that.
Okay, any last question, comment from the floor? Yes, two more. Take from the floor, and then we'll let you guys make a final remark.
My name is Sally Randy, and I am president of the American Renewable Energy Institute and also CEO of Stillwater LLC. And I think that what you're doing with water is exceptional. It's great. What you're doing in many areas is really good. But what I want to know, I'm interested in global protection as related to your investment priorities. And my question is, what do you need, given where we are with CO2 in the atmosphere? I know you're moving to natural gas, which is a methane GHG and has less time in the atmosphere. CO2 lasts about 150 to 200 years, methane up to 10 years, but it is a more lethal greenhouse gas. So given where we are, globally with the atmosphere. My question is, what do you need to be able to invest in clean, renewable energy, solar and wind? What do you need to put that on your investment horizon?
Okay, that's a fascinating question, but you know, it's not quite water energy yet, so if you want to answer it too, but you may also want to have a couple minutes afterwards if we don't have enough time here, because it's a very interesting question about that movement. But if you can go ahead and answer in a second. Let me have one more comment. But we don't want to end the thing moving into renewables because we're still in the water-food nexus here. But it's an important question, yeah.
My name is Bart Hagemeyer, working for Wetlands International.
A water guy.
Oh, a wetlands guy. And wetlands are important for water, and that's where my question is going. The nexus is well appreciated. Everybody agrees that there will be a lot of stress, and we have to make sure that people have enough food, enough energy. The question is, how can we make sure that in solving all these stress questions, we also make sure that the ecosystems are taking along, and that where we start to put a value on water to make sure that we do not waste it, that we can also put a value on the other ecosystems that are related to the water and to the ecosystems that provide the water. So how do we value those ecosystems in a way that is not necessarily $1 or €1, but in a way that we can still compare to the value that is represented through energy or through food? How can we make sure that the ecosystems again do not lose out in trying to solve this stress nexus?
Okay, what I think we can do is then wrap up and ask the panel to respond to both questions a bit. Shell can say a little bit about the renewable versus fossils if they want a lot. And it's a big topic there, but in both renewables and fossils you still have the energy, water, food crisis that we're looking at, the stress crisis. And what you've brought back now is a landscape approach of here, particularly wetlands as your interest, but landscapes in general. Are landscapes the nature-based solution to this? Are landscapes another part of the stress crisis? And it is, as we deal with energy, water, and food, are we able to maintain, or are we going to erode the landscape basis of which all these are based on? Not just in climate, as we talked about with CO2 emissions, but in actual on-the-ground degradation or overuse of resources. So why not everybody would want to make a final comment? Anybody? Allard or? Go ahead.
No one wants. We won't make a comment.
Oh, yeah, just make a final comment if you'd like to, yeah.
Okay.
Last parting thought.
Last part of the talk. For me, it's just emphasised again, indeed from the comments from the floor, is important to think of watersheds and river systems. That those mountains, those forests at the top of the water towers, and when you must respect those, and then you have to follow that all the way down, and it has an immediate impact on food and energy to everybody in that water system. In terms of the future, I really do believe that, going back to the sector discussion, that businesses will make more money if they address these issues. I genuinely believe that no business can afford to stand up and say, we're not part of the solution. I'll give you one example. We've had the privilege to work with a bank who invested, putting nearly over 10 years, 5,000 of their staff into the field for 2 weeks to work on forest climate change activities. And that bank has proven with an audit internally that level of staff engagement has improved their business. So that wasn't about supporting us as a research institution, that improved their business, because understanding climate change and sustainability into the DNA of 300,000 staff was a good thing for the future, and indeed that same company is now investing another 5 years on a water program. So it's a very interesting partnership. So I think if one can see these discussions going down the route that this is actually good for business, and not just, oh gosh, we've got to do this because we're worried about the environment, I think that's a great way forward. Finally, just to say that we cannot make any progress on all these issues unless there's investment at a local level with local communities for them to be brought into the, if you like, ecosystem and the ecology of the areas that we have the privilege to work. And that's a message that's been coming out time and time again these few days, and it's one I like to think that the communities that we work with will be part of discussions just like this, and actually contributing and having a feedback and saying, this is the traditional knowledge, this is what we've done in the past, this is where the tensions are, can you help, can you give us support, etc. And that's why I think Julia's commitment to get a wide, diverse community as part of this Congress is to be applauded. Thank you.
Any other final comments?
I'm going to echo the point about future thinking, and it goes to your point about solar and wind and what we need. It was 3 years ago now that Dow kicked off a dialogue, both externally and internally, about sustainable chemical companies' role in a sustainable society. We picked a point in time out into the future that correlated with Dow's 200th birthday, which would be the year 2097. We tried to recruit people to get involved in this visioning process. One of the best stories around this was inviting John Elkington, who at first said this was an insane assignment to try to look, at that point it was 88 years into the future, and then he called back and said, I have to be involved in this assignment because it becomes a little bit intoxicating at first. Why did we choose such a long distance? Because I think, without speaking for Shell or Rio Tinto, we can look at companies like ours that make investments for the long term. When we build a chemical facility, when Allard invests in Qatar and spends $30 billion, he expects that investment to pay off for decades to come. So we think in the chemical industry, in the mining industry, in the energy industry, in terms of decades, long term. And so the thinking that we're doing is increasingly incorporating what we think is going to happen over the long period of time, where the transitions need to be made towards alternate energy sources. We're nowhere near as big as Shell in terms of producing energy, but we're still a large energy user, and we're concerned about that. What's it going to take? A short answer to that is societal will to move through a transition that's going to be very difficult for all of us. If we look at lifestyle changes that we'll have to make, if we're going to look at public policy, if we're going to look at the prices on things, it's going to be a very difficult transition for all of us to make. We've got to have the political will, but if I say that, it sounds like I'm blaming it on government and not blaming it on anybody. It's all of us having to make a transition to a more sustainable future, where we can talk about the price of solar, we can talk about the price of wind at this point. If we put proper prices on the externalities at this point, we'd find that those technologies would be incentivized again. That may need a kickstart from public policy, but those are the kinds of things that would be necessary. Long-term thinking is what we're going to have to do.
Peter?
So just a couple of things. I think one thing that I do feel, if you are to break through some of these things, there's learning by doing. I certainly spent some time over the last few years working on projects around carbon capture and storage, and it was only really by working on the ground and trying to get projects working that you really understand all the dimensions of complexity, all the partnerships that you need to bring into play to actually make these sorts of projects work. We've been talking over the last few days about a lot of our work on biodiversity, and one of the core things that clearly, to achieve net positive impact, we need to do is around offsets and getting offsets working and certainly here in some of the developing countries we work in. And that will demand a sort of partnership approach again with various players, including government, including local communities, including conservation organisations to help us with that. And it's only by going through that we'll learn, I think, some of the difficulties and challenges of actually moving that forward. So I think that is one sort of aspect of this that is very important in moving us forward. I think the other thing is just that the importance of sort of partnerships to actually, in more general, to help us through this. I think that the reality of the Nexus is no company has that sort of answer no NGO. We actually do have to have this dialogue to sort of broaden our horizons and think through the issues. And I think that's why sort of, you know, the engagements we're having around this are so important.
Thanks. Just to return to my initial comments and try to take them on from where I said it. First, it's great that companies are addressing resource scarcity in the way. There's no doubt about it. Really very helpful. It's also incredibly good that even if it's in the scenario context of what Shell is doing this, that it's not only kept as scenarios, but it's actually taken down to concrete implications and standards and influencing the investment decisions. I mean, that clearly is what a company can and should do, and that's what it's best at. So, very happy that that the companies here are doing that in that way. The issues are so big that one would like to do like the ostrich and put one's head down somewhere and try to forget them. Or as when I criticized, questioned the